What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Ravenswatch, specifically its 1.0 release, as it is finally leaving early access, or I should say did a couple days ago on the 26th, after spending about a year and a half there. Now, Ravenswatch, if you have not heard of it, is a roguelike action RPG that plays around with a lot of fairy tales and fables, putting you in the roles of characters like Little Red Riding Hood, Sun Wukong, Beowulf, the Pied Piper, that kind of thing, in order to progress your way through various nightmares, as it were, fighting off enemies as you go, completing quests on some randomly generated maps, advancing both as you take on these individual maps, but also overall as you increase your character's level or the character you are playing as, unlocking skins, their own story, etc. as you go. Starting at the beginning a little bit, however, first you'll pick what character you want to play as. You'll start with just a few of these guys unlocked, but as you complete chapters with the heroes you have, you'll unlock the others. There is a total of 9 of them, and then you're going to pick the difficulty you want to play on, which starts off small, and then you can work your way up to harder difficulties. And you can also choose to add modifiers to a map. These will, of course, make things more difficult on you generally, meaning you can mix up the challenge and whatnot as you go. But then, as you've seen at the bottom of the screen there, I'm sure, you have the option to join a multiplayer team. You can play this with, I believe, up to 3 others, or completely solo. It's fine either way. But I imagine just the addition of co-op is going to give this one a lot more legs than it would have otherwise, as it does seem like the kind of game that's fun to mess around with. But once you are actually in a game, let's talk a little bit about what's happening here. So your goal basically is to spend about 3 days prepping for the coming of a nightmare, at which point you'll then fight that nightmare, though you can speed that up if you are, say, ready beforehand. But otherwise, you're going to take your character and try to do as many activities, etc. across this map until that particular point comes. Now, each of these characters play a little bit different. The sort of default one starting out, Scarlet, or the Little Red Riding Hood, turns into a werewolf at nighttime, as the game does have a small day-night cycle. Now, some of these events are pretty much what you'd expect. Fight off a bunch of enemies for loot, currency, shrines, etc., but the rewards, both in terms of the experience gained causing you to level up, as well as some of the rewards you'll find as loot, come down to talents and dreams. So talents are essentially your main bit of progress as you level up. They modify your skills in some way. You can think of this like Hades or any other number of roguelite action RPGs at this point. But you'll also be picking up currency that you can take back to a vendor towards the start of an area and purchase talents from that character as well. But really that's just part of it, because there's all sorts of events and things you can find along the way. Little quests you can undertake, basically. Now, one of these that I ran into was trying to help one of the 3 little pigs gather enough stone to build up their house before nightfall and a bunch of monsters come and attack them, which I did not manage to do in time. And despite failing, it made me laugh enough that it was still worth the experience as far as I'm concerned. Sooner or later, no matter how good you are at this, you're going to pass away, let's say. But death might not necessarily be the end of your run, because you get a bunch of raven's feathers that can bring you back once per feather for your runs. Now, I believe you can buy some more of these at some point in the middle of a run, but once these run out and you can no longer revive yourself, that's when you'll finally be kicked out of the run, so to speak, and tossed back to the main menu. However, as you get farther and farther along the game's 3 chapters with each individual character, you will start to unlock more and more of their story. For instance, Scarlet, or Little Red Riding Hood here, is the werewolf in this particular instance, and one of her stories explains how she had a big fight with her grandma and left before all of the nastiness went down, let's say. So even story-wise, they've put a few fun spins on it, but let's talk about the combat specifically. So as you might imagine, each of these characters has their own style, but they all can kind of be divided up into a few generalities. Each character has a basic attack, a power attack, a defensive ability, an ultimate, and like a special. But then what that character is and does tends to expand a little bit on that. So as an example, Beowulf uses like a little worm that follows him around to augment his abilities, whereas Scarlet turns into a werewolf at night, which completely changes her moveset. So as a human being, she can sneak around and avoid detection, throw bombs, but then as a werewolf, she can activate a big roar, which gives you a lifesteal effect and allows you to pounce on enemies for extra damage in melee. So you can kind of play around with that back and and forth as the game shifts from day to nighttime. Whereas the Pied Piper instead uses things like song and a swarm of rats, as you might imagine. Now, around level 5 or so of playing any individual map, you'll eventually get access to that character's ultimate, which is of course a giant ability that often sort of changes the landscape of the individual fight that you're in, so that's worth knowing. So when it comes to mastering a character, you've got to, of course, handle all of their basic abilities and understand how they play, but then also be able to build up a build from all the talents and things you gain as you're leveling, before ultimately confronting the boss of a given area. These are much larger fights that tend to have actual mechanics and will put you to the test. Now, you can summon these guys early if you think you're ready for it. Otherwise, you just want to level up until the clock runs out and they get summoned. But as you try, fail, try again, you'll unlock more and more progress for those characters, including new talents and things that become available to allow you to vary up your build and, of course, perform better and better each time until you ultimately find yourself clearing it out and moving on to the next difficulty level, which again can all be done entirely with friends if you prefer. So when you put all of that together, I think you've got a pretty compelling little indie ARPG. But mostly I would describe it as a sort of odd amalgamation of a lot of different roguelites and ARPGs and things I have seen in other places sort of thrown together into an interesting mix. Though I'd say the main thing to be aware of right this second at launch time is that, probably a bit unsurprisingly, it does seem that they are having a little bit of trouble with their multiplayer servers at the moment. So if you're specifically wanting to play multiplayer, you might want to hold off a little bit until they get those stabilized before fully jumping into it. But otherwise, this seems like a great game to simply kill some time, or even just to play with your friends. But I think that is pretty well going to wrap up this particular video. I just thought this game was kind of neat and worth talking about, so I wanted to give it some attention on the channel. So I certainly hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. And to that end, certainly do let me know how you feel about it down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.